And then we'll get started with, we'll finish off chapter 8, see how we get on. Great. Om Jnana Timirandasya Gyananjana Salakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Tadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Harijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Visakanvitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gorangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Rishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Bhaevacha Patitanam Bhavnebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pachani Nirvisesa Sunyavadi Paschacharitatani. So hopefully everyone knows where we are. If anyone would like to start, please kick it off.
Okay, I don't mind.
Haribol.
So I can get on the screen.
Where are we in chapter 8, did you say?
Oh, it's just over halfway down. It starts in February.
Okay, thank you. I'll have a look. Thanks.
Yeah, it starts in February of 1956, yeah.
So in February of 1956, while the US was struggling with civil rights, while Khrushchev and Eisenhower were both openly deploring the arms race and were maneuvering in nuclear disarmament talks, and while the Shah of Iran was visiting New Delhi, Abai was trying to bring back to Godhead. In winter's discomfort, he walked through the early morning streets of Delhi to visit Surendra Kumar Jain, the printer, to read the latest proofs. By walking, he saved money. Only when he was delivering paper from the paper dealer to the printer would he rent a rickshaw. He had no chadar, only a lightweight cotton jacket, and he wore rubber shoes. He also wore a cotton hat that covered his ears and tied beneath his chin, protecting him from the 40-degree wintry mornings and the sometimes gusty winds. Kumar Jain. My first impression was that he was a nice person and straightforward. I felt pity also because of the conditions under which he had come, or he would come. I know he didn't have even 25 paisa. He would come all the way on foot and without any breakfast or anything. He would come in the morning to the press, and when I would ask him, Swamiji, did you have anything to eat this morning? He would say, oh no, Mr. Jain, I just came because I had to see the proofs. That's all right, I would say. I will get breakfast for you. I would call for breakfast, and then he would sit and work. He would do the proofreading himself. The printing was done by me, and most of the time he would like to be present when that final printing was being done. He would come in the morning around 7 and stay until he had seen all the proofs. It was a regular thing that he would come without breakfast. I would arrange for breakfast, and we would sit across the table from one another for hours together. He was always talking on religious subjects only. But when we would be sitting, especially when waiting for the proofs to come, we would discuss many things. I felt that he knew quite a lot because he was a well-read person. But he was more of a friend than just the person coming to get things printed. He was a very simple man, straightforward in his habits. But his mission at that time was particularly to further the movement of Back to Godhead. His financial condition was very, very weak. Sometimes the printing would be difficult because he was not able to arrange for the paper. Many times I told him that if he was feeling difficulty, why was he continuing? But he said, "No, it is my mission, and I will always carry it on as far as possible." I tried to accommodate him to the maximum possible extent, but he was a real pauper. I only did the printing, and he had to arrange for the paper, so sometimes it was delayed. Although my job was printing, sometimes I would say, "All right, you are so keen, I will give you the paper." But usually he would arrange for it himself, since we only did printing. He would bring it in a rickshaw. We were not uncomfortable together, but as business would have it, if the bills were standing for a long time, then I would ask him if he could do something about it. He would say, "Don't worry, you can be sure that your money is coming." I never asked him where his funds were coming from, because I felt that it was his personal matter. But it was embarrassing for him when he could not pay, so I never tried to embarrass him. He was concerned that if he didn't have any money, then how could he print the paper? And he definitely wanted to run that paper. He wanted to preach the teachings of the Gita. He thought of it as a sort of a movement, that it was the only way that people in the world could find peace. His conviction was very strong. After picking up copies from the printer, Abai would walk around the city selling them. He would take a seat at the tea stand, and when someone sat beside him, Abai would ask him please to take a copy of Back to Godhead. He also went to the homes and offices of people who had already donated or agreed to see him, and he sought out new contacts, sometimes on recommendation, or sometimes by going uninvited wherever he could find a potential reader. When he delivered copies to regular donors, he would discuss the previous issue's philosophy with them, and sometimes write articles on topics they requested. Our esteemed friend, Sri Bisham Prasad Maheshwari, one of the learned advocates of the Supreme Court, has requested us to write something on the principle of fruitive action, with special reference to vice and its potency. Often donors agreed to see him not so much out of genuine interest or affection as out of a sense of obligation. In their traditional Hindu piety, they felt obliged to see the sadhu, take his paper, and even think well of him, but not necessarily to read his newspaper. Once when Abai was approaching a well-to-do house, the owner came onto the second floor veranda and shouted, "Go away, we do not want you here." Someone want to take over there?
Yeah, sure. Abai, responding to the resistance, polite and impolite, that he met while selling Back to Godhead, wrote an article, "No Time, a Chronic Disease of the Common Man," for the March 16th edition. When we approach some gentleman and request him to become a reader of Back to Godhead, sometimes we are replied with the words, "No time." They say they are far too busy in earning money for maintaining the body and soul together. But when we ask them what to do, when we ask them what do they mean by the soul, they have nothing to reply. Dr. Megnath Sahar, a great scientist, was busily going to a meeting of the Planning Commission. Unfortunately, while going in his car on the road, he died and could not ask death to wait because he had no time at that moment. Dr. Ansari, the great Congress leader, while dying in a moving train on his way to home, said that he was himself a medical man and almost all his family were so. But death is so cruel that he was dying without any medical treatment. Therefore, death has been described in the Bhagavad as the indefatigable. Death is awaiting everyone, although everybody thinks that he may not die. There is life after death. The busy man should try to know this also as to whither he is going. This life is but a spot in his longest sojourn, and a sane person should not be busy with a spot only. Nobody says that the body should not be maintained, but everybody should know from Bhagavad Gita that the body is the outward dress and the soul is the real person who puts on the dress. So if the dress is taken care of only without any care of the real person, it is sheer foolishness and a waste of time. Abai was an unusual newspaper vendor. He didn't loudly hawk his paper on the street or sell it from a newsstand. He approached individuals quietly as they sat to drink tea, or he would call on acquaintances in their offices or places of business. Taking a copy from the stack he carried underneath his arm, he would present what appeared to be an ordinary tabloid newspaper with bold black headlines across the front page. But what odd headlines! The lowest of the mankind, philosophical problems with social awareness, sufferings of humanity, the pure consciousness of nationalism. Anyone could tell at a glance that this was no ordinary newspaper. Abai would say something to try to convince them to take it anyway, before they said, no time. On behalf of his spiritual master and the previous Vaishnava authorities, he was playing a role, the newspaper salesman, a smiling demeanor, a gentlemanly invitation. No, it wasn't an ordinary newspaper, but they would find it interesting, and it only cost 6 paisa. Thus he was extending the mercy of Lord Chaitanya, handing out the truths of the Vedas in easy-to-take form of a newspaper. Despite his desperate poverty and the urgency of his message, his writing was never shrill, strident, or fanatical. He wrote expecting to find his reader prepared to hear sound philosophy and always willing to accept the truth, especially when presented logically and relevantly and supported by the authoritative Vedic literature. Although experience on the streets of Delhi had shown him that people were shallow, distracted, and uninterested in self-realization, he knew that most people, at least at some time in their lives, pondered the crucial themes of philosophy: whether God exists, whether he is a person, why there is suffering. So Abai appealed to their higher sentiments. Spring of 1956 brought visits from US Secretary of State Dulles, and a few days later Lord Mountbatten, the former Governor General of India, who was greeted at the airport by thousands. Then came the celebration of the once sacred day of Holi, when urchins spray all passers-by with coloured dyes. Prime Minister Nehru toured the Delhi slums, expressing disgust at their prevailing conditions. He announced India's intention to develop atomic energy, stressing its peaceful uses. The weather warmed. A border clash began between India and Pakistan. Delhi railway workers went on strike. Meanwhile, Abai continued to preach. He somehow managed to meet the financial, editorial, and printing demands and published his 6th issue for the year of 1956, the May 20th edition of Back to Godhead. The front page carried a special notice. As a matter of principle, please read Back to Godhead and revive your deeper aspect of personality. There is nothing in it which is our ideology manufactured by imperfect sense perception, but all that it contains are messages of our liberated sages. We are simply helping them to speak again to men and women in easy language for real life. Every responsible man and woman must therefore read it regularly at a cost, a very insignificant sum of, I don't know what that is, 2 or 4 rupees a year. Do not neglect it. It is for your interest. It will create a happy society of humanity. In How to Broadcast the Teachings of Bhagavad Gita, he talked about the need for spiritual organization in society. A model community, which he named Gita Nagari, the village where the Bhagavad Gita is sung, would live by the Bhagavad Gita and preach its message to the world. Praising Mahatma Gandhi for his Vaishnava qualities, Abai suggested that Gandhi had also esteemed the Gita Nagari concept. It was the only way of relief from the sufferings caused by demoniac principled leaders who were misguiding the present demoralized civilization. He was calculating how to capture the restless popular imagination. He wanted to present Krishna's teachings in a clear, straightforward way and distribute them widely. He felt that good arguments from authoritative scripture would appeal to sane, impartial, educated people, even though they claimed to be uninterested. He knew that somehow, without abandoning his gravity and his absolute conclusion, he must capture their interest. They were relegating religion to some book of scripture on the shelf that they never read, didn't understand, or couldn't believe. He brought it to them as a newspaper, yet it was as good as the scriptures. No, it wasn't what they expected in a newspaper, but they might read it. The chanting process of the holy name of God as conducted by the propaganda of Back to Godhead is not pleasing to the superficial pleasure hunters describing men and women in indecent literatures in national news, but it is the means of relishing the transcendental eternal life.
I can continue. In addition to selling Back to Godhead at tea stalls and delivering copies to donors, Abai also mailed out free copies, both within India and abroad. For years, the vast audience of English-speaking readers outside India had concerned him, and he wanted to reach them. Having gathered addresses of libraries, universities, and cultural and governmental outlets outside India, he mailed as many Back to Godheads as he could afford. He prepared a letter for his Western readers, suggesting that they should be even more receptive than his countrymen. Although the messages contained in Back to Godhead are all gifts of the ancient sages of India who actually realize the absolute truth, yet at the present moment, the so-called leaders of India are too much enamored by the Western way of material advancement of knowledge. They are completely neglecting the treasure house of knowledge left by the sages. You gentlemen of the Western countries have seen much about material science, and yet peace is not within your control. In most cases, you may be feeling the want of peace, although you have enough materially. This basic defect of materialism remains undetected by the misleaders of India, and therefore they are not serious about going back to Godhead, the ultimate aim of life's journey. On the home front, Abai sent copies of his latest issues of Back to Godhead to the President of India, Dr. Rajendra Prasad, along with a letter warning of the perilous fate that awaits a society conducted by asuras. Please, therefore, save them from the great fall down. Abai's letter of November 21st was outspoken. I have got the clue of going back to Godhead just after leaving my present material body, and in order to take along with me all my contemporary men and women of the world, I have started my paper, Back to Godhead, as one of the means to the way. Please don't think of me as something wonderful or a madman when I say that I shall go back to Godhead after leaving my present material body. It is possible for everyone and all of us. Abai requested His Excellency at least to glance over the headlines of the enclosed 12 copies of Back to Godhead and consider granting the editor an interview. There was immense work to be done on behalf of India's spiritual heritage, and there should be a specific Ministry of Spiritual Affairs for this purpose. I am crying alone in the wilderness at the present moment, wrote Abai, but His Excellency never replied. In his Back to Godhead, Abai was making propaganda against the atheistic view. In Hope Against Hope, he frankly admitted that 80% of the people he met while selling Back to Godhead were atheists. Sometime we meet gentlemen of up-to-date taste and try to make them interested in the matter of Back to Godhead. They say very frankly that they have not only no interest in such theistic subject, but also they condemn the attempt to bring back people in general to the path of back to Godhead. According to these gentlemen, economic conditions of the Indian people deteriorated on account of their too much faith in God, and the sooner they forget everything about Godhead, it is better for them. But we cannot agree with this atheistic conclusion of such up-to-date gentlemen, devoid of the sense of Godhead. Abai argued that although independent India was now educating her citizens in godless materialism, her economic conditions were not improving. Many Indians did not even have the bare necessities of life. He cited that 120,000 were unemployed in Delhi. Some of the well-posted government servants or some of the fortunate businessmen may feel themselves happy, but 90% of their brother citizens do not know how to meet the both ends together, and therefore the economic condition is definitely not satisfactory. Does someone else want to read?
He quoted former United States President Hare as Truman as saying that national independence means that citizens should have a comfortable life. So if that were the case, said a boy, where was India's independence? His point was that all attempts at happiness and prosperity are unlawful as long as they fail to recognize the proprietorship of the Supreme Lord. An atheistic civilization could never produce peace. In progressive ambition and unsatisfied lust, a boy wrote, there is no dearth of money, but there is dearth of peace in the world. The whole human energy has been diverted to this money-making business. It has certainly increased the cheap money-making capacity of the total population, but the result is that such unrestricted or unlawful inflation of money has created a bad economy, has enabled us to manufacture huge costly weapons for destroying the result of such cheap money-making business. The authorities of big money-making countries, instead of enjoying peace, are now engaged in making important plans as how they can save themselves from the modern destructive weapons. As a matter of fact, a huge sum of money is being thrown into the sea for making an experiment on such dreadful weapons. Such experiments are being carried out not only at huge cost, but also at cost of many poor lives, binding thereby such nations in the law of karma. Those who unlawfully obtain money would find it snatched away by taxes for wars and other agents of an illusionary nature, in the shape of medical practitioners, lawyers, tax collectors, societies, constitutions, so-called sadhus, famines, earthquake, and many such calamities. A miser who hesitated to purchase a back to Godhead by the dictation of illusionary nature spent 20,000 rupees a week, ailments, and died at the end. A similar thing happened when a man who refused to spend a paisa for the service of the Lord spent 30,000 rupees in litigation affairs between members of his home. That is the law of nature. A worker in New Delhi post office, noticing the title of magazines the boy was sending abroad, took the opportunity to argue his atheistic options with the boy. Srila Prabhupada. The postmaster was an Arya Samaj, and he was talking to me about the paper Back to Godhead. He raised the question, if we do our duty nicely, what is the use of worshipping God? If we become honest, we become moral. If we do not do anything which is harmful to anyone, if we act in this way, then what is the need of this? Because your paper's name was Back to Godhead, he was indirectly protesting, what is the use of propagating the philosophy of Godhead if we act nicely? That is the Arya Samaj's view, how to avoid God. So I replied that if one is not God conscious, he cannot be a moralist, he cannot be truthful, he cannot be honest. This is our point of view. You study the whole world just on these 3 points. morality, honesty, and dutifulness. But if he is not God conscious, he cannot continue such things. To revive all these good qualities in society, you have to invoke God consciousness. A Delhi man noticing a boy distributing back to Godhead remarked, "Where is Godhead? Can you show me God?" The boy replied to the challenge, but he also pondered a deeper reply that he moved throughout the city during the day. On returning to his room, he began an article, "Where is Godhead? Is it possible to see him?" In the Secretariat buildings in New Delhi, there is an inscription on the stone that liberty does not depend upon a people, but it has to be earned before it can be enjoyed. Actually, this is a fact that we have seen, and much sacrifice had to be rendered by the people of India before they could gain Swaraj. But in the matter of Godhead, some irresponsible people ask, "Where is God? Can you show me? Have you seen God?" These are some of the questions put forward by some irresponsible men who want to have everything very cheap. If for attaining a temporary false sense of liberty in this material world, so much labor and sacrifice has to be requisitioned, it is possible to see Godhead, the absolute truth. So is it possible to see Godhead, the absolute truth, so cheaply? To see God means complete liberty from all conditions. But is Godhead an attending orderly so that he may be present at my command? The atheist, however, demands like that, as if God is his paid servant. And he thinks that God is an imaginary thing, otherwise he would have appeared before us as soon as the demand to see him is made. One time while he was walking on a scheduled street, pursuing back to Godhead duties, a stray cow, the kind commonly seen wandering the streets of Indian town or cities, suddenly charged him, goring his side with her horn, and knocked him down. At first he could not get up, but no one came to help him. As he lay there, he wondered why it had happened.
Summer came, and the 110-degree heat made it almost intolerable to spend time out of doors. Hot, dust-laden winds blew in the city streets. Street-side hawkers closed their businesses during the day. In early May, during 112-degree heat, a man collapsed in the street and died of heart stroke. But Abhay had ignored the heat and the ordinary limitations of the body. One day, while delivering back the Godhead to various addresses in the city, Abhay suddenly began reeling, half unconscious, overcome by the heat. At that very moment, an acquaintance of his, a man he had approached during his preaching, happened to be passing by his car, and he took Abhay to a doctor. The doctor diagnosed him as a victim of heat stroke and ordered him to rest. On June the 20th, Abhay approached the 8th consecutive fortnightly edition of the year. Its front-page article condemning both materialistic family life and false renunciation of family life. It had been almost 2 years exactly since he had left his home and taken to the Vanaprastha order, and his comments of family life seemed autobiography as well as scriptural. He quoted a statement by Prahlad Maharaj from Srimad Bhagavatam. Persons who are always disturbed in mind, the cares and anxieties of household affairs, may quit off the place which is the black hole, temporary abode, family life, to kill oneself and take shelter onto the lotus feet of the personality of Godhead by entering into the forest. And he admitted the management of a family is more difficult than that of an emperor. But trying to avoid family life by living in the jungle without the real spirit of renunciation was monkey renunciation. In the jungle, there were many monkeys who lived and ate fruits and kept female companions. The real remedy lies in the act of accepting the service of the lotus feet of the Lord. That makes one free from all cares and anxieties of life. That makes one able to see Godhead always and everywhere. Real renounced life, therefore, was possible without going into the forest. Even if one remained in the dress of a householder, he could be freed from cares and anxieties by engaging himself in devotional service. On September the 1st, US President Eisenhower condemned the Soviet secret testing of a nuclear bomb equal to 1 million tons of TNT and scoffed at the Soviets' claims for peace. In the Mideast, Egypt's nationalized the operation of the Suez Canal, causing an international crisis. On September 20th, 81 nations met at the UN to form a new international agency to help tame the atom for peaceful purposes. Abbai saw some of the headlines and heard talk of the latest news from gentlemen he visited. He frankly told them that without Krishna consciousness, the problems of cooperation by the politicians were all phantasmagoria. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had said that if only one soul could be turned into a pure devotee, his mission would be a success. Yet sometimes Abhay became overwhelmed when he thought of how small he was, how much work had to be done on behalf of Krishna, and how difficult it was to convince even one conditioned soul.
Right, very well. I think we can leave it at the end of that chapter. It's a nice place to wait till next week to break it up. Brilliant. Thanks everyone for reading. It's always so nice to hear everyone read. It's really sweet. I don't know if anybody had any reflections they wanted to share.
Yeah. I was thinking of something when we first started reading. They were talking about people. They were spending a lot of money on medical, but it couldn't save them from death, even if their whole family were doctors, sort of thing. It reminded me of something I saw. It was one of these films, these gangster films, and the guy was lying on his deathbed, and like he asked to see the Godfather, so the Godfather came to see him, and the guy's lying on his deathbed, and he's saying to the Godfather, he's like, "You can protect me from death. Please protect me from death, Godfather. I know you can do it. Please protect me from death, Godfather." And the Godfather went like that, just said one sentence, and I thought it was so profound. The Godfather just went like that to him, "That I cannot do." I thought that was like, did you hear what I said there at the end? Yeah, the Godfather just said to him in his really deep voice, "That I cannot do." I thought that was really, kind of, even the Godfather was admitting he couldn't save his subordinate from death, even though his subordinate had so much faith, So it reminded me of that, because I thought that was quite sort of, kind of spiritual and profound for a gangster movie, It was like, that he's admitting that, So that came in my mind. I thought I would just mention that. I thought it was an amazing part of a film, I thought it was quite kind of, sort of funny in a way, but serious at the same time. Any comments on that?
Yeah, it reminded me when we read that, actually. Prabhupada, I think it's in the Ishopanishad, and maybe it's not, but Prabhupada uses that example where he says that two people can have the same illness, and one person can receive very expert medical care, and somebody else can receive next to nothing, and the person that gets the medical care may pass away.
Yeah.
They leave his body, and he's saying, so actually from that you have to conclude that everyone's dependent on the Lord for everything, that it's your money can't save you, nothing else, and it made me think of a friend. It happened to a friend of mine, actually. He found out he used to work for Google, and he found out he had a brain tumor. He was going to change his job. He was going to leave Google and get a different job. But he found out he had a brain tumor. So he stayed working at Google for a while, and he used their private healthcare to have the operation done, to take this thing out. And it was a real, what do you call it? Routine operation to have it done. But he died on the operating table.
Really?
my school friend. He's one of my best friends from school. He didn't die on the table. He died like a few days later. But something happened in the operation, and it didn't work out. And yeah, a few days later, he left his body. So, but he deliberately sought out like the best surgeon in the world. He'd stayed in that job to have the best surgeon, and it didn't make any difference at all to the outcome. It was like they said it was like a 1 in a million or something. That out of a million operations like that, maybe one of them goes wrong, and the surgeon was absolutely distraught. He was in bits because he's like, he said, I do this every day and it never goes wrong. But something had happened. So it made me think of how flimsy and false material energy is that we all do. I think Jabuvanath talks about that in his lectures. Says that we have this real tendency to think that Maya's actually all right and the material world's actually okay. And Maya's been pretty good to me. I've got a house and a bit of money and, whatever. I've got a car on the driveway, and actually, it's not so bad. It's actually it's ruthless here, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. I particularly liked hearing about how Prabhupada writes. That was really amazing. It said that he wrote, it's never shrill, strident, or fanatical, and he writes expecting to find the reader prepared to hear sound philosophy and always willing to accept the truth. Made me think it's almost like he knew there were people out there. He was, even though he couldn't see them, he was speaking to these people that he knew were there somehow. That he didn't sort of pander to some tabloid style headline or something. He was speaking to kind of like refined or cultured people. They were intellectual people. It's interesting, I suppose, from a point of view of how we try and communicate Krishna consciousness ourselves. I thought that was interesting. Our university program just started again last night. So we're now meeting all these new students. And so we have to figure out how to talk to them. We have to figure out how to speak to these people. And so you have to speak to them as if they're ready to accept it, actually. Yeah.
I think that's what I found attractive when I first started reading the purports in the Bhagavad Gita as it is, that Srila Prabhupada is writing it as if you're accepting it. This is the truth, and there's nothing, there's no kind of beating around the bush, as it were. And therefore, I think if you're ready to accept it as truth, it makes it a lot easier because he's writing like that. And I think that's what helped me for sure, because I felt ready. And the tone in which it's written is, this is truth, this is how it is. So I think there's something to be said for that straightforward and truthful way of writing.
Yeah.
For sure.
There's definitely I'm sorry, Boo.
There's no maybe, it's just like, straight to the point. There's no maybe. I like how Prabhupada can put in one, like, there are a few lines, one paragraph, how ridiculous the material world is. Well, the scientists with their titles and PhDs and all the letters after their name are trying to make the material world look like a kind of sane place, and what they know is great knowledge and everything, and Prabhupada just kind of cuts it all in one sentence, or one paragraph. I love reading like that, how Prabhupada just is straight to the point of what the material world really is in a paragraph. When the professors are all trying to make themselves look good and make it look as if they're very educated and full of knowledge, and really Prabhupada has got the real knowledge. I like being like that,
Yeah, it carries a weight when you hear Prabhupada write. It's like, I mean, I always laugh when I read Prabhupada's books myself, because I just think it's completely outrageous that this someone's the things he comes out with. It's like, who would dare write that in a book and publish it, you know, and then distribute it and give it to the prime minister of like every country. And like, he's really quite, he wrote to Gandhi, and he's just written to the prime minister there, and he's quite brazen actually in calling a spade a spade. And I wrote a really, I didn't write it, I read a really nice letter where Prabhupada, he was writing to a disciple, and he said something like, he said, I act like a king because I know no one can defeat me. He said, I act like this. I walk around giving it, but you know, we would say giving it all that, you know, like he's obviously Prabhupada's word language is so much better than that, but you know, he walks around like that because he knows no one can defeat him, and he knows that because he's just repeating what his guru said. He's actually very humble. We sort of tend to think humility means sort of being small and whatever, shying away. But he's actually so humble that he just knows that, yeah, my guru will take care of everything. So it's like he speaks like, yeah, it's amazing the way he talks with no fear whatsoever of being defeated. He just knows that he's right.
Yeah, sometimes if I was out distributing books, I was like, oh God, what are they going to make of this? You know, you'd be like, you know, giving certain people books, and you know, before you go out in the morning, you'd be like, you'd know what you'd be giving people, you know what I mean, on the street, and you'd be like, my God, you know, it's like, how can I give them these books, sort of thing, you know, what are they going to make of these, you know? It's like, I mean, I think kind of you need to be in an environment, devotional environment, or following to a certain extent to understand the books to a good degree. But I think people on the street, you know, they can understand a certain amount if they take it home and read it, you know, but it's like you say, some of the things in it, you're like, you know, sometimes, I mean, I used to wonder, I used to think, God, I mean, I honestly used to think when I was in Soho Street in the 80s, I used to think, my God, it's a wonder some governments don't bomb the temples or something, you know, because, you know, it's like a complete, I mean, Prabhupada wrote things in his books like people who are like dogs vote for people who are more than dogs, you know. I mean, he wrote stuff like that in his books, you know, so it's like, it's straight to the point, isn't it, you know, and I sometimes wonder, it's a wonder, you know, people haven't got together and sort of tried to do something about it. But Prabhupada says the politicians are too arguing with each other to see the threat of Krishna consciousness, you know. So
yeah, and quite often too puffed up to take it seriously.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
They're completely blinded, you know. Like Hiranyakashipu, he actually fought with Lord Nrsingadev. It doesn't. I don't think it mentions it in the 7th canto, as far as I remember. But I was hearing that they actually fought, I think, for days, Hiranyakashipu and Lord Nrsingadev. And Lord Nrsingadev was throwing him around like a cat throws a mouse. So even when Lord Nrsingadev burst out of that pillar, Hiranyakashipu still was up for a fight. He didn't take one look at him and go like, yeah, I don't fancy that. I'd better, you know, and just bow down and admit, okay, I was wrong. God is everywhere, you know, like, I'm really sorry. He didn't apologize. He rolled his sleeves up and went, all right, let's, you know, which is obviously a really stupid thing to do because he's, you know, he's a fool. So,
yeah, there was that kind as well, wasn't he, in the Krishna book, who dressed like Krishna and made out that Krishna was an imposter, right?
oh yeah.
Is that a story in the Krishna book? Have you heard that?
Yeah, I can't remember it. Yeah.
Is it Shishapal? Is it his cousin or some relative or in-law?
I think it was Draka or somebody, I think he was called. he dressed up like Krishna, and he had a chariot and an army, and he was called Krishna Imposter.
Mm.
So I suppose it gets that ridiculous, you know. It's like, you know, we put forward the truth, but people, you just like, you know, they're so proud that they can't even think it might be right, you know.
Yeah, they're so utterly convinced that they know better. They don't take it seriously. I mean, it's like the people Prabhupada's talking to. It's amazing reading the beginning of this, and you hear all these people giving their little sort of, they're obviously doing an interview or something for Satsvarup Maharaj, or you know, for the book, and all these people, you think, I wonder what they made of Prabhupada later, or the people that sat outside the tea shop in Delhi and said, sorry, no time. If you could go to them 50 years later and be like, what, do you know who that guy was? That you So it's kind of like a similar thing, but on a smaller scale, I guess. People just take a look and think, I'm not, you know, they're so covered, they can't see something for what it is. So it's, I think Prabhupada said to his disciples, right? He said, I came in like a needle and I'll leave like a plow to the West. I think he said, I came in like a needle. I was so small, no one noticed me. I was just a little old man with some books. But by the time I leave, I'd have wrecked everything, basically. You know, so it's, I think people don't take him seriously because they can't really see what it's about. And then, yeah, like that. Yeah. Amazing. Okay, so I think it's getting close to 7:30. So I think if anyone's got any, I don't know if anyone has anything else they wanted to share just before we wrap up.
I was thinking about that today, about, you know, approaching people like of influence and things like that. And I think the only way we can do it is if we get people behind us, you know, if we get enough people behind us, you know. I think that's the only way we can do it, you know. If we get enough support, we have to get a lot of support, you know. We have to get a lot of support from like the common people, you know. Then we can influence people. Otherwise, I think that's the only way we can do it. If we get like a lot of support from the common people, you know.
Yeah, my spiritual master was saying to us before we should give. He asked all of us. He said you should be giving books to the leaders. So he told all of us, go and make an appointment with your local MP. Tell them that you're from ISKCON. Take the books and prasadam. Ask them to read the books, and you know, like that. So I actually did it in Brighton. I met my local MP. He was a Conservative MP. And I had like a half-hour meeting with him or something, and he stayed with me for close to an hour, and he listened to what I had to say, and I gave him a Bhagavad Gita, just the first canto, Srimad Bhagavatam, maybe a couple of other things, and some prasadam, and he listened to everything I had to say. He was really like absorbed. He actually overran the meeting to talk with me. And at the end, he asked this brilliant question. He said to me, how should I read the books? He said, I'm going to go away and read these books. He said, how should I read them? Like, is it literally true? Or is it just like a fable? Or, you know, he was like, so I was just talking to him about it. I thought, wow, this is a really special person, actually. It's like just some Conservative MP somewhere outside in East Sussex or something. You know, he's not like an important politician, but I asked our spiritual master, and I said, so is that how we do it then? That it comes from above, that you give Krishna consciousness to these people, and then it filters down to everyone else. And he said, no, it goes both ways. He said, you should try and make the leaders Krishna conscious, but you should also make the people at large. And once you get both, then one way or another it will happen. I know at the university, I was talking to someone who'd spent years doing chaplaincy work in universities. And I was asking him about there should be like a spiritual library in every university. So how do we do it? And he said, basically, he said what you said back to Vinod Prabhu. He said, like, he said, like, money talks. So if you get enough students that want it, the university have to do it. So I think it kind of works both ways. Yeah, if you get enough people behind it, then you reach a tipping point.
Yeah, we know our local MP. Our local MP, she goes up to the temple, she goes up to festivals and things, and I've met her a couple of times at flower shows and things like that. Met her husband as well. We got on really well with her. I email her maybe once a month or something like that. She always writes back. And before the pandemic as well, we used to go down and see her, you know, even sometimes once a week or something like that. She's very, very friendly, and so is her husband. And, you know, she wants to do something to promote Krishna consciousness. Well, she is doing something to promote Krishna consciousness. So, yeah, I'm kind of working on both, you know, because it's good if I go to her and say we're getting on well with the locals and this, we're doing this, we're doing that. Because then she feels like she wants to give us more support, you know. So it's a relationship that's building, you know, it's building very nicely. And, you know, during the pandemic has been a good time for getting on with locals as well. So I've been letting her know that, and she's very happy with that. And yeah, we got on really well. I actually consider her a devotee, you know. I consider her a devotee. In her heart, she's a devotee. So, you know, very good. Like, so, yeah, see where that goes. I've met the First Minister of Scotland as well, Nicola Sturgeon. I met her when I was out in book distribution. She was very pleasant, very nice, you know. So we can see what we can do there. I know the devotees have done a kirtan in the Scottish Parliament as well. They've done a kirtan program there. So I think it's a case of everybody working together, you know. It's a case of everybody working together and taking every opportunity to make every member of the public we can favourable, you know. That's the way I do it anyway. I wear tilak everywhere I go, so that just in the hope that somebody will say Hare Krishna, and quite a lot of these people do, you know. I'm confident to do that. I know everybody doesn't want to do it, but I'm confident to do that because it's just like, well, I'll get nothing to lose. I just take up every opportunity to try and make a member of the public favourable. It's good for them. It's good, you know, for the whole world. Every snowdrop, you know, eventually the place will be covered in snow. That sort of idea, you know what I mean?
Yeah. So what Prabhupada did, he just made one at a time, you know, one person at a time. And it builds up and builds up. Jai. Okay, I better get uploading this, but thanks everyone for joining in and coming. And I think we'll be on Facebook tomorrow if anyone's around. So I think we'll be doing that again tomorrow night, and we'll be back doing this again next week, I guess. Yeah. So yeah. It's
a really good service you're doing there, Prabhu, doing this. It really is. I really appreciate what you're doing. Because it helps us a lot because we're still stuck in the house a bit due to the pandemic. Scotland's still a bit in a lockdown and things like that, you know. So it's really good for us. Thanks very much.
It's a pleasure. It's a real privilege to be able to read because we're fairly isolated here. There's not that many devotees around us, actually. It's all just, you know, especially in the lockdown. So we're really, really privileged that we get to read with people. It's great. Yeah. So we're really lucky. Thanks to everyone. Yeah. And thanks to Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Yeah.
Haribol. Great. So we'll see everyone soon, I hope. Yeah, great. Thanks, everyone. Hare Krishna. Haribol.
Yeah, thanks, Lucy, and Mahamantra.
Hare Krishna.